Before we get started with this episode, I wanted to give you some exciting news that the first Wednesday of every month, there will be an introductory session presented by me for the Creighton model system, which is a system of fertility charting. This introductory session, you will leave knowing the basics of knowing how to chart your cycle, and you will learn so much about your reproductive anatomy, hormones, physiology, all the things. So many times I give this presentation to women and to couples, and they always say, why have I never known this information before? So if you are interested in signing up for this introductory session, it is just $50 to get started with this session. From there, we'll do some one-on-one coaching, get you really locked and loaded with knowing how to chart your cycle and becoming so much more empowered from there. Visit truthandfertility.com to sign up. Welcome to the Truth and Fertility Podcast. I'm Haley, wife, mom, and a fertility charting instructor, here to teach you the undeniable truth about your fertility. So let's get started. Welcome, everybody, back to the Truth and Fertility Podcast. Today, I have Katie here with us. She is from Shiloh IVF Ministry. This topic of IVF is one that I have not touched on yet here on the podcast. I have a deep desire to enter into this space and to talk to women and couples about this space. But I think, especially with such a tender topic like this, it can really pull your heartstrings, and it can really, it can affect women and couples when they're entering into this topic, and specifically healing from their experience with IVF, or if they have any close friends and family who have experienced or have gone through IVF and have experienced the other side of it and what that looks like. It can be very tender. So, but I'm really blessed and honored to be able to talk with Katie today. She is a co-founder of Shiloh IVF Ministry, and it is, for my understanding, we'll have Katie go into it here in a second, but for my understanding, it's really just helping the couples that have walked through the IVF process, and helping them walk them through the healing from the trauma that can occur during that process. So Katie, without further ado, why don't you go ahead, introduce yourself, introduce your ministry, and then we'll start chatting about it.
Okay. My name is Katie. I experienced infertility with my husband for pretty much the duration of our marriage, which is just at 20 years. And we used IVF, and with our last 4 embryos, really had some questions about how we were going to proceed and whether we wanted to proceed. And we ultimately decided to transfer all of them at different points in time. But coming out of that process, we kind of realized we had experience with infertility, we had experience with miscarriage, we had experience with IVF, and really wanted to try to figure out how to help other people going through the same thing. Right. So I reached out to, organizations that were dealing with infertility, and trying to figure out a space, because you don't hear a whole, depending on which organizations you're looking at for infertility, you may or may not hear a bunch about IVF, or certainly people's experience when maybe some things are successful and some things aren't successful about it. So it's not really a dream treatment, So there's can be a hard place to figure out how to share about IVF experience. So as I was looking, I was connected with the other co-founders of Shiloh, and they were working on a post-IVF ministry, and they needed kind of someone who had experience with IVF. And they had kind of already done some research related to what the pain points are after people have gone through IVF. And one of the biggest pain points is what to do with remaining cryopreserved embryos. And, there's a lot of feelings of confusion and anxiety and despair and just kind of crisis emotions that people experience when having to figure out what to do or knowing that they're still out there. So Shiloh was founded to accompany people who have been through IVF and who have the weight of remaining cryopreserved embryos.
Yeah. Wow. And that everything you just said is so loaded too. And so I really want to unpack everything you said just now, because I want to go through your experience too, because nobody just forms a post IVF ministry unless you have, this is going to sound dumb, but like, unless you have a reason to form a post IVF, like, unless you see a need there of couples and even yourself needing that support after you've gone through that process and recognizing, okay, maybe I still have a few of the cryopreserved embryos. I have frozen children. Like that is a very, that in and of itself, you could have a bazillion hours of discussion around. And I know that there is a bazillion hours of discussion around how do we handle this. But going back to your experience first, I want to ask, why did you decide to choose IVF in the first place? Like, were you presented other options, or was that your only option? Kind of walk me through a little bit about what that looked like.
Okay, so our first choice was actually when we realized we weren't getting pregnant as expected. You know, I just kind of walk through life thinking you have sex, you get pregnant. Boy, it doesn't work that way all the time.
Yeah.
For some, it does. So anyway, when that wasn't quite working, we had experience with adoption in family and friends who had adopted. So we pursued adoption, and we have our oldest daughter through traditional adoption. And then when we were ready to adopt again, doors didn't open quite like they did the first time. So we were left kind of, well, we're wanting more children. We decided to pursue diagnosis of our infertility. And really the option that was presented to us as being potentially the most successful was IVF. Now, at that time, we didn't really know of alternatives to IVF, say any natural family planning, NaProTechnology,
What year was this?
restorative reproductive medicine. It was 2007.
Okay.
Is when we
I feel
adopted
like,
our oldest. And then
yeah.
we were looking again, and ultimately our middle child was born in 2012.
Okay, I see.
So it's kind
And you're
of
right.
between those years.
NaPro, yeah, it wasn't, I mean, it was there, it was a thing, but it wasn't nearly as talked about as it is now. So I get the reason why you never even heard of
Yeah,
it
I mean,
or
we
knew that
just
that was an option.
didn't see anything,
Sure.
but the fertility clinic down the street. So that's kind of where we went.
Okay. And then from there, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm assuming the experience left some, maybe trauma is too strong of a word, or again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what was your experience like that led you to recognizing that people who go through the IVF process at the end, they need help? Like, what was your experience? What showed you that need?
Yeah. So, um, I'm just going to give you an outline briefly of the IVF experience for us, and
Yeah, that would be
then get
helpful.
into where our thought process changed and the need for healing, essentially, and wanting to help others. So when we first started down the IVF route, we had 16 eggs that were harvested. And at the time of that harvest, they were able to fertilize 12, I guess. 12 became embryos. Then we had one that was transferred through a fresh IVF cycle, meaning they weren't ever put in the freezer. It's like within the few days of growth of the embryo, they transfer it back in to our womb. So we were successful and have our middle daughter as a result of that cycle. And then a couple of years later, we went back to have another one transferred, and we miscarried with that embryo. And then we went back again and have our youngest daughter as a result. But overall, we had, so they created those 12 embryonic children. And then by the time we had our first fresh cycle, we had 6 that were then put in the freezer. So there were several that died in that initial phase. And that's the case with IVF, is there's some death all along the process, right? We went from 16 eggs to 12 embryos to 6 that were frozen and 1 that was transferred. So then after all that, we had 4 remaining cryopreserved embryos that just kind of sat in the freezer for a few years. And we began talking about something pretty mundane, but budget, and we see this budget line item for cryopreservation. That's like however much every quarter. Okay. I don't really remember how much it was. But we're like, do we really need to be spending this money? How can we get this? I mean, it was kind of like, how can we get rid of this line item? And then it became more discussion about, well, do we want more children? I don't know. We have 3 children. We're pretty busy already. And really just began praying about it and talking about it. And we're going to pursue the embryo adoption route. And then came to the realization, like, these are our children. We have adopted one. Like, we never expected to be in the position where we would be creating an adoption plan for our children, right? Because we want them all. So we decided ultimately to transfer those final 4. We had 2 they were frozen in pairs of 2. So we had the first pair transferred and we miscarried with those. And then the final pair did not survive the thawing process.
Okay.
So I remember, though, sitting in the clinic at one point, like, how do we tell, I asked the doctor, like, how do we share this experience so other couples don't go through this? Because this is excruciating when you realize, like, these are your children. They are indeed life, and they're sitting in the freezer, which is not really a place for living things, right? Like, we were in a rush to get them as quick as we could to save them, Sure. But it took us a while to get to that point. And we're like, how do we talk to people about this? How do we tell? And the doctors kind of are like, huh?
Right.
Like, didn't really know what we were even trying to say, I don't think, confused by, like, this is just IVF,
This is the process. This is what happens.
Yeah, this is kind of what happens. And it's like, wow, this is kind of excruciating. So anyway, that's kind of when we began, like, thinking, how can we use this for good? And how can we use our story? Because when we had the last 4, and we really didn't want to go through IVF again. We kind of saw it as what the process that it is, which kind of takes everything out of the hands of the couple and puts it completely in the hands of the doctor. And, you're supposed to kind of have that loving embrace between spouses that creates the child and houses them in loving warmth. And so, we didn't necessarily want to go through it again, but we're like, this is how we save our kids from cryopreservation. Like, this is how we give them the best chance at life.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, that began. Really, my husband is supportive. He's kind of supportive in the wings. And I'm the main one who is figuring out where to share the story and that sort of thing. So he engages in conversation with me a good bit about it, and trying to figure out. But that's that's kind of what led us to trying to help in some way with where we were, what we went through.
Yeah. And I'd love to know too, Katie, if was there a moment in time during this process that was it like a moment where you're like, oh my gosh, these are our children? Or was it just kind of gradually to that understanding? And I ask this because I've worked now with multiple people that have pursued IVF that wasn't successful for them. And so now they're moving into a more natural space of NaProTechnology, learning about their cycle, trying to achieve naturally. And a lot of them I've noticed still have this mindset of this is not my baby yet. And even I'm even thinking of a couple that had a miscarriage, and their response to that miscarriage wasn't the response that I normally see. It almost seemed like a self-protective mechanism of pulling away from the idea of that's my child that didn't make it. Like that is a really hard reality just for a natural miscarriage. And then let alone when you're going through IVF and now you have potentially dozens of embryos. Do you see that more of like a self-protective mechanism, maybe in the whole industry, to not recognize those as children? Or like, I guess it's maybe a twofold question of kind of the industry in general on how do they act around the idea of these are actual children versus you and your husband? Was it a gradual coming to that realization, or was it like a moment that happened? You were like, oh my gosh, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so there were a couple different things going on in our life that caused me to really deepen in faith and prayer. That was completely unrelated to, I think, the IVF and our embryonic children. But once I started down that path, I was journaling, and I'd have kind of a code word that said snowflakes. That was like my code word for these remaining embryos. And I'd be like having them on my prayer list, but it was really an, oh my gosh moment. And then once I kind of had that moment, I like went right to my husband and like, oh my gosh, these are our children. We need to save them. And he's like, okay, let's do it. Because they were actually on his mind a lot more than they were on mine until that point. But as far as the industry goes, it's a lot safer if you say embryo, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Because when you start calling them children and people's children, then it becomes much harder to do the process. Like it was much harder when we referred to them as our children. It was like, wait, we have our children in the freezer? Who does that? So I think from the industry perspective, it's a lot harder to use those words. But it's also medical speak. If you talk to any doctor, nurse, anywhere, like I have a background in nursing and transplant, but so we use medical terminology all the time, and you see people's eyes kind of glaze over. They don't really know what you're talking about, and so to some degree, I think I was familiar with medical procedures, all the things. So it just seemed like what might seem unusual to some people didn't necessarily seem unusual to me in the IVF process at first. It was like, okay, it's another medical procedure.
Yeah. Well, and an embryo is an embryo. I mean, that is the correct
it
term
is,
for
yes.
it. Just like how a baby is a baby, an adult is an adult, right? Like it's a stage in the lifespan of a person. But when you can't see an embryo, because we don't usually see embryos, it's hard to assume life with that being. So I can recognize that that being almost like a dissociation of recognizing, like you said, if you were to be calling these your children, that would change the game for a lot of people. Do you think the doctors are aware that they are actual children? Like, I'm so curious to know about the doctor's perspective with this too. In your experience, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm guessing, I mean, it would be a guess, really, if I were to say. I'm guessing they try not to talk about it like that, you
Sure.
know. Um, because I really do feel like our doctors were trying to help us. They were, wanting that child, they were wanting that baby in our arms for us, So I do feel like they were thinking they were doing the best that they could. I
Hmm.
don't feel like they were trying to undermine us or do it. I mean, I really do believe they were thinking
They had
this
good
was the best
intentions.
treatment, you know. Um, but it falls short in so many ways, you
Yeah.
know.
Right.
Um, and I was going to say something and I forgot what it was. Hopefully, I'll think of it in a minute.
That's okay. Yeah. So you said that it was kind of a moment in time that you realized, oh my word, these are children. Was that, and it sounded to me like that was a moment in prayer. Is that right? Where you were praying
Yeah,
over
it
your,
for certain was.
yeah, yeah. And that's exactly how the Lord just, takes the glaze over our eyes to help us see. And then we can take action from there. But
He
wow.
sure
Okay.
does.
So when you when you were completely finished with that IVF process then, and you were at the very end and you looked back on your journey, was there one instance that you were thinking that was the most maybe painful or the most need in healing for you, or was it more of just the process itself, like as a whole? Tell me about what were your feelings and thoughts at the very end of the whole process?
So for us, I feel like the biggest, well, a couple things. One, we felt like we needed to make a decision about our remaining embryos, and so once we made the decision to transfer them to our own selves, then we felt like, okay, we're like the weight was lifted. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? But not everybody, like we were in the situation where we had four, we decided we could manage that and we would try to do it as quickly as possible. But not everybody is in that position. I mean, a lot of embryos can be created. And so
Right.
people can go through cycles and have like 9 and 10 left, and they might come to this realization in their 40s, in their 50s, in their 60s, and they're not really of childbearing age anymore. And like, what do we do? So um, it's it can be a little different because we have closure, which helped us heal. But so what we're trying to do with Shiloh is help accompany people to some form of closure that they discern, as a couple, and move through that,
Sure.
and heal from any part of the process. I mean, there's healing from, just how you obtain the samples. And I mean, there's healing kind of from the whole process and even your infertility. I mean, you mentioned what I was going to say earlier goes back to your comment about miscarriage and almost like not seeing it as a child, you know, and you mentioned it being potentially protective. And I think it so much is not only for like IVF, but infertility as well, because like the infertility hurts so deep and you just don't want to be hurt again like that. Like you just don't want to keep hurting. So it's easier almost to like shove it in the background. Like, I don't want to be hurt again. So if I just pretend like, or not pretend, but if I just kind of don't feel,
Disassociate.
if I disassociate and don't feel all the feelings, because I know the first trimester is risky and I know I might miscarry, then maybe it'll be a little softer. And it's not really much softer. The miscarriage is rough. No,
Yeah.
no matter how you
Yeah.
cut it or how
Sure.
it happens, it's just a rough process. But I do think there's some protection. I mean, if it tells you anything, we like had a list of names and an Excel spreadsheet for our first daughter born through IVF that we took to the hospital with us. Like, we couldn't even pick out a name before she was born, because we just were like too afraid to think that it would actually happen. I mean, even though we'd been through the whole pregnancy and things were fine, we're still like, well, we'll believe it when she's here,
Yeah. Well, and especially coming from that experience of infertility, and nobody, I mean, in my understanding, nobody goes through IVF unless, well, I guess a couple wouldn't go through IVF unless they have an experience of infertility. So you're already bringing this huge weight of pain with you into this process. And then now adding on all of the pain that comes with the process, I can completely understand why somebody, just for the sake of preserving their sanity, would feel the need to dissociate. But I think the healing then comes in a very painful way, but I think it's necessary to then recognize the reality of what actually happened. And I think that can be, and I'm sure you could speak to this too, but I think that can be the real start to kind of opening the wound back up to allow it to be healed, right? Because sometimes wounds have nasty scabs or scars over them, and they need to be opened back up first to then heal properly. And so that recognition, that association from that disassociation, that can be the most painful part, but it's recognizing the actual reality of what ended up happening. So why don't we then transition more into your ministry side of things? Because now, in your story, we're at the end of your experience. You and your husband did have some closure from being able to reconcile those frozen embryos. And so now you're at this point where you've experienced the process, you've experienced the highs and lows of the process, and now you want to help other women and couples who are going through this process. So what did building this ministry look like in the first place?
So when I joined in, our other co-founders had already kind of done research with people who had experienced IVF, right? And so they asked a whole bunch of different questions about things. And really, like I said before, they found the pain point as being what to do. Like, when people thought about their remaining cryopreserved embryos, it was painful, and so in thinking about those, again, we had people like have one word that they chose or used to describe what they felt. And I mean, it was, depressed, sad, anxiety, confusion, all kind of words in that realm, which nobody's like, yay, I'm so glad we have some more for more cycles. The people who answered the survey were not super excited. They were feeling these rough feelings. And so we bounced around different ideas and really started with one, kind of getting our nonprofit 501c3 approval, and then looking at mentorship for people. So a couple could reach out to us, or an individual, and be like, we've had this experience with IVF. And then we ask some more questions about their experience. Were they a participant? Do they know someone? Whatever. And then, do they have remaining embryos? Do they not? What their faith background is, what are they married or divorced or whatever, and then kind of go from there to match with a mentor to kind of go through some spiritual healing, ultimately, looking at I mean, it's kind of dependent on what they need. And a lot of people just need to know there's somebody out there who knows what they've gone through and what they're going through, So there is a lot of just conversation that offers healing. Like, somebody understands that this can be painful too. And so, but we have spiritual healing that offers like guided kind of meditation about who God is, who we are as children of God, what sin is, like back to kind of the basics, redemption from sin, why we might need healing from IVF. And there's like a whole list of reasons why.
Yeah. I actually wanted to touch on that really quick. Maybe not really quick, but touch on what are the types of things that you've seen couples. What are those pain points? I know you said the couples who still have frozen embryos, that's a huge pain point. And I know I am Catholic, and so coming from the morality of the Catholic Church, from what I understand, we don't even really have an answer yet as to like what on even an ethics or morality aspect, what to do about that problem. And so I can imagine the pain, or actually I can't imagine the pain that comes with kind of the questioning of morally, physically, what do we do with these embryos? So I know you said that that's really one of the biggest pain points, but were there any others that you see commonly that couples express needing either healing from or experience trauma with in any sort of process of IVF?
I mean, I think at this point, the large majority has been around remaining embryos in some way.
Okay. Yeah.
So either somebody has, so a lot of some couples are in agreement with what to do with their remaining embryonic children, and some aren't. So that creates a bit of division within a couple,
Right.
And ultimately, like, you want to be unified with your spouse, right? So I think that can create some friction and people not knowing what to do. One partner may have a deepening of their faith and the other one doesn't. So then what do you do? So people have like come to us after having discarded embryos and like, I've communicated from the church, or like, can I go back to church, or like,
Yeah.
and so we can kind of offer them the steps to ultimately, like, God's here,
Yeah.
we might have to take a few steps to get right with him, but he's here for us no matter what we do. Like, we can't do
Absolutely.
anything that makes him love us less, right? Which is
Yes.
so like, I didn't realize how much I needed that
Yeah.
till going through this process. I'm like, oh boy, am I glad I have a God who loves me no matter what,
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so there's things like that. Or like a couple folks have reached out to us that are like women who were going through IVF with their husband. They planned to transfer all their embryos, and their husband unexpectedly passed away. And so now the decision to, do they transfer their remaining embryos or do they not? And that's like a difficult decision that you wouldn't
That
have to
is
make
so
if you didn't go
right.
through IVF.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um like, so there's things like that, or just people wrestling with, okay, these are, I mean, so the options for remaining embryos are that you keep them in cryopreservation, right? Which to some extent, they are living. It's paused. Their life is kind of paused in a frozen state, but they are still alive. So that's one way. Or you can donate them to science, or you can thaw them, or you can, donate them to another couple. So there's a couple different options, but like when you look at those, none of them are great,
Mm.
right? I mean, um, you either keep your child frozen, or you donate to science, or you discard it, or you thaw it and kind of let it die naturally and give it a proper burial, or you donate it to another couple. And like thinking about someone else, like my child being out there, and I'm not the one that's taking care of it, that's a really hard decision. And it's a life affirming decision, but there's a lot of things that go into that decision. And so I mean, we know, like, especially with the Catholic Church teaching, we know that we shouldn't donate them to science, and we know that we shouldn't discard them, as medical waste. But
Yeah.
the other options are kind of still to be discerned,
Yeah.
and all of, they're all hard,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I
No
mean,
kidding.
they're like, oh, these aren't good options. The best option for me is to like transfer them myself. But again, a lot of people don't have that as an easy option.
Yeah. Uh, I also want to recognize too that when you're talking about all these experiences that these couples have, and I've never thought of like, okay, what if the spouse dies unexpectedly and you don't have the capacity to take on more children? Okay, there's that. You said earlier, couples get into their 60s before they recognize that they have frozen embryo or frozen children, and at that point they can't carry their children anymore. There's so many different scenarios, and it helps me to appreciate why this is such a thought out and discerned decision, because of the fact that every person's scenario is different. It's not just here are frozen embryos, here's what we need to do with them. There's infinite amount of scenarios and experiences. And so I want to then ask you, for the couples that you've experienced and walked through, but also even for yourself, something that I've noticed that can be incredibly heart-wrenchingly difficult is you look back at this experience and you recognize, maybe this wasn't the best choice, or maybe, or even I regret this choice, or so you can have negative feelings about the choice, and you can have trauma and needing healing from that choice, but yet you wouldn't have the child standing in front of you unless you had gone through this choice. And I feel like that, especially for women, I find that men can sometimes maybe separate those a little bit more to recognize, like, okay, maybe the IVF wasn't a good decision, but I have my child here and that's great. So I feel like maybe for men it's easier to separate, but for women, at least just in my experience and the experience of people that I've talked to, it is so hard to say, I regret that decision, because it makes it sound like you're saying, I regret my child. So tell me, is that something that I'm sure that's something that you've at least heard of people experiencing? Tell me a little bit about that. And have you found a way that people have reconciled that?
So I do think it's really hard for us to use the word regret, and we typically try to avoid it
Okay.
because, I mean, and so we tend to say, in need of healing,
Yeah.
because it's hard for me to say regret. I have two beautiful kids as a result of IVF, so that
Yeah.
I obviously wouldn't have had I not gone through it. However, we don't, I mean, our society tends to want to live in an either or, like, if I have kids, I must love IVF. And, you know, I don't love IVF. I love that I have my children. I don't love how they were created. You know, I don't love that I
Hmm.
have 10 other children that died in the process to
Yeah.
create them,
Yeah.
So you live with both, right? I have tremendous joy that I have from as a result of IVF, and I
Yes.
have pain that I live with, and I live with both, you know, um, and that's just how it is. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's, to me, like the difficulty is that I, if you have children naturally, right, or you create their um, born, like conceived morally, I should say,
Sure.
um,
Yeah.
then you at least know you're on the right path in creating your children. Like something happens, it's kind of beyond your control, right?
Yeah.
But if something, I mean, there are obviously certain things that are beyond my control as a result of IVF, but it was in my control to do it or not,
Yeah.
and so my choice that I made created both the good and the bad, you know, um, whereas my choice, if I had chosen differently, there might have been bad and good, but it wouldn't have been because of my choice necessarily.
Yeah.
Does that, I mean, I don't know if I'm
Yes.
explaining that very well, but
No, you are. You are. And from what I'm hearing, it's really just the reconciliation of that is the being okay with not reconciling that.
yeah, yeah,
That's what I'm hearing. Like
yeah,
just recognizing like, yeah, this is not something that this is something I need healing from. This was a painful process, but really good came out of it. And of course, on a moral level, we look into that on a physical and an emotional level, on all the levels we look into that. But just the reconciliation is the not reconciliation and being okay with the twofold thing. This actually segues into a question I had on my mind as well that I wanted to pick your brain about. And maybe your ministry doesn't reach this far quite yet. But have you ever worked with children or maybe adults now that were conceived via IVF or really any sort of artificial reproductive technology? Is this something that they also you find have had to reconcile, or maybe you don't have this experience yet, but I'm just thinking of, this being something that's hard to reconcile for the parents, but I can also see on another level for the children, this being something of, with the questions coming up of, was I supposed to be here? Was this meant, just all of those types of questions, I can see that they're needing a space to be healing for the children as well. Do you have any sort of experience with that?
yeah. So we're just getting into that. Like our primary has been post IVF stuff, but we realized like I mean, within the last couple months, we updated our website so that we could capture who's coming to our webpage, to see. And so we do have tracks actually on the website. Like the biggest heading is post IVF, but not far below that is for both people considering IVF, and there's information along that pathway, and children conceived of IVF, where you conceived of IVF, and there's information along that pathway. So we're hoping to like build out to see what the need is, because there's a couple different ways it can go, right? I was fortunate enough to be in a conversation with a couple other folks earlier in the year that I was doctors who had participated in IVF, as well as moms who had participated in IVF, as well as children who had been conceived of IVF. Like they're adults now, but to just talk about the different issues with IVF. And the one thing that both of the adults that were conceived through IVF mentioned is it was told to them all along. Like they knew from the get-go that their parents used IVF to conceive them. So it wasn't anything super, difficult for them. But what they did find difficult is knowing that they had siblings out there that didn't make it, you know. So that leads me to believe like it's good to tell your kids early.
Yeah.
What's difficult is when they don't know, and so, I mean, we know from the research with traditional adoption, we know that like the conversations that you have with your kids and having kind of somewhat open adoption and letting them know kind of their origins from the beginning is helpful, right? And knowing who they are and where their place is in the world. And so if you translate that to kind of IVF, and we have people who use donors, egg donors or sperm donors or
I can
what
imagine
have
that
you.
being very painful for a
Yeah, and
child.
so there's
Yeah.
some realizations, like some people are struggling with, what conversations do I have with my kids who might be adults or they might be children? How do I tell them? Because they might have remaining cryopreserved embryos that, like, well, that's really their child's siblings, so what do they do? And if they haven't told their children yet, and maybe they're adults, like they may think their mom is their biological mom when they in fact used a donor or something like that. So that can be a tough reality if the kids haven't known from the beginning what the story was.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it can kind of, again, like you said, it can kind of run the gamut of, like, some kids will be just fine,
Yeah.
and it was never
Yeah.
a big deal. And there will
Mm-hmm.
be others where it's kind of rocked their world.
Right.
Um, and ideally, we want to accompany anybody who's been touched by the IVF process, but especially those parents and people who have been through IVF who need to have those conversations or are struggling to feel like nobody else knows what I am talking about, or the
Mm-hmm.
difficulty in this, or I need to just keep this to myself. And,
Yeah.
um,
Even just recognizing you're not alone, and that goes for anything, right? Anything that you're struggling with or need healing from, the recognition that you're not alone can be the thing that helps you actually enter into that healing. Like that's sometimes the first thing that we
absolutely.
need, is to recognize, okay, my feelings are not taboo. I'm not alone in this. And there's other people that have gone through this and can help me walk through this. That's a
Absolutely.
huge stepping stone to even entering into that process of healing. So what does your ministry actually look like? Because I'm hearing a lot of, you have people that are walking couples and walking women through their healing post IVF. So what does that look like? Do you guys do like virtual meetings with, or do you have people like on staff or on ministry that are assigned to help people, or do you have retreats? Like, what does this ministry look like?
Yeah, so right now, it's all kind of volunteer based. We're hoping that will change at some point, but that's a good bit in the future. So right now, someone would reach out to us with any concern they have. On our website, they can contact through different avenues. But they would reach out, and then we kind of talk amongst our group of mentors, like who seems to fit best, at least initially, to kind of consult and chat. And then, and that's virtual. I mean, it's virtual, usually via Google Meet or Zoom or something like that.
Okay.
And then really try to nail down kind of what the couple or individual needs. Whether they need to kind of go through a spiritual meditation guide, they can do that themselves, or they can walk through that with one of us. It's, we kind of have an outline and scriptural verses and questions and things for them to think about in the process. So we've had either people go through that on their own or walk with us. We have both ethicist as well as a deacon that is part of our ministry. So they frequently talk with our clients as well if they need more discussion in either one of those realms.
Yeah.
And then it's really kind of up to the client how they want to go, how they want the conversations to go, what they need. We've also given like reconciliation guides for folks, trying to encourage, sacraments. We are open to all faiths and all people,
Mhm.
but we look at things through a Catholic lens.
Okay.
So we are going to be trying to adhere to Catholic teaching as much as possible. But again,
Mhm.
you know, there's not a whole lot of ministries out there. So we
No.
want to accompany anybody who needs it. Um, so
Do you
yeah,
guys have
and
any retreats?
we're hoping that we will do retreats. We just have to gain our enough client base to make that possible. And we would consider probably doing that either virtual or in person, depending on the desire.
Mhm.
Our goal would be that we have in-person retreats, similar to say Project Rachel or
Okay.
something like that.
Yeah.
That's our ultimate
That would be
goal.
awesome. Yeah.
Um, and then we do have on the webpage, we also have an honoring page where people can honor any children that are lost in the process or honor their living children in some way. Or, embryos that are remaining in cryopreservation, somehow honor the children in the process. And then anybody can offer a testimony. There's not a whole lot out there of people having gone through IVF and experiencing the need for healing or like this joy and pain. People are like wanting to say, I have kids and it's great. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
and that may be how they feel, and that's fine. But there is a place for people who are experiencing the pain in it as
Right.
well. And I think, um, sometimes it's hard to figure out if you're an infertility ministry who is not, if you're trying to keep people away from IVF, and um, pursue more natural options or more moral options, then it's hard to know where that testimony and witness has its place, because you don't want people to be like, well, she did it and she just, you know, she repented and everything's fine.
She's facing the suffering, but she has a baby. Like
Yes.
that is hard.
And
That
so
is
I
really
think,
difficult.
you want people to just have their eyes open, and ultimately they're going to have to discern
Yeah.
what treatment is right for them. But you can at least give them all the information that that's
Yeah.
kind of what I think. I
Yeah.
mean, I can at least share my experience, and like you at least fully know the ups and downs now, whereas you can, I would say, with the descriptions that the medical team gives, you can kind of not really know what you're
Yeah.
getting into,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. To the fullest extent. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is, I think it's really, this is the crux of it is, am I even allowed to see this as a suffering because of the fact that I faced infertility beforehand? I have children now. Is it even okay for me to feel this, that there's a suffering from that IVF process, because is that taking away from my gratitude for these children?
Right.
And that, yeah, and as you just said, like, there's not, the pain is in the not being able necessarily to reconcile that, but being okay to not being able to reconcile that, and still being okay to say, my children that I have, uh, they still have the fullest extent of dignity, and they still have every ounce of love and care, and are deserving of everything that any other human being that's creative, right? Like every human being is created in the hands of God, and he allows this to happen for God knows why. And I have plenty of questions to ask him one day. But this is a hard thing to reconcile. And I think even just for this ministry that you've founded, to even be a place to say, you can still love your babies, but recognize you need healing from that process. Like, and just knowing that that's okay. Like it's okay to be experiencing that. So
Absolutely.
I think, I don't know if I said this on or off air earlier, but I think your ministry is filling a very deep need. That, as you said, there's not a whole lot of ministries out here. You're the first that I've ever come across. There's not a whole lot out there, and so this need might even seem kind of like IVF in and of itself is kind of newer, right? And so now just for the first time, we now have adult children of IVF. And so now we're getting into that conversation too of, okay, is there healing need to be, do they need healing from this process? There's a lot still to unpack, but I think your ministry really, it is so needed, and it's filling a huge gap. So thank you really for starting this. And I really see it growing. I really, really do, because so many people need this help, even if they don't know they need this help. They need this help.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think it's a new enough idea that I think there's an awakening, to some extent, that will be happening in having conversations about it, because I think it's easy to put it in the back of your mind. I mean, we did it for years,
Yeah.
and just not think about it. But the more that it's talked about and the more people see, I feel like that's true with infertility as well. We got to talk about it, and people need to know it exists. I mean, yes. I didn't even know infertility was a thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's just so much. And like the idea for us, we were struggling so hard because we wanted this baby, right? And it's like the thing, we just want to give our love to a child. And truthfully, it didn't have to be our child, right? We adopted, we don't care whose child it is. But the idea that we wanted to be parents, and gosh, there's a missed opportunity to talk about spiritual parenthood in the world of infertility, because everybody wants to say, your biological parenthood, you can adopt, you can, but people are out there with infertility that are spiritual parents to all these people in their circle that is not even being talked about, their coaches and their teachers and their I don't know, friends and stuff, that they're bringing so much life to others. And I think we've got Jesus, and he's the ultimate gift, even more than this baby. That's he's going to be the healer.
Yeah.
Right. Because you have one child and you want another one.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the reality.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so the God and Jesus are the ones who are the only ones who can fill the hole that we have.
Yes.
And that's for all of us, whether the hole is there because of a child that we don't have, or whether we're not getting the job that we want, or whether we have difficulty in our past, in our childhood, all the things. We are constantly searching for something to fill this hole, and it can really only be filled by God.
Amen. Absolutely. Well, and that's what your ministry is helping couples do, is
absolutely
is healing, and the healing starts from recognizing who your healer is.
Yes.
And who you are in your healer's eyes too.
Absolutely.
That's a big one too. Well, Katie, I so just appreciate this conversation. I appreciate your ministry. I appreciate you and just all the work that you're putting into this. it's, as I keep saying, it is filling a huge gap. And so I'm really appreciative of that. If somebody's been listening to this and they need your ministry, or they are desperate to volunteer in your ministry, where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can find us at ShilohIVF.com.
Okay.
It should lay out
How do you
pretty
spell
easily
Shiloh?
how you get.
Just to make sure, how do you spell Shiloh?
Yeah, SHILOH.
Got it. Okay. And I'll put everything in links in the show notes too for people who want to check you out. So Katie, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Haley.
Thanks for listening to the Truth and Fertility podcast. If you are enjoying this content, please leave a 5-star review. That helps me tremendously. For more information about learning to chart your fertility cycle, you can visit truthandfertility.com, and I'll talk to you guys again next week.